Hello and welcome to the People, Place and Nature podcast. When we talk about sustainability, it's easy to forget that some of the challenges we face in creating the greener, more sustainable world that we're after lie in people. I don't mean in the sense that people are the problem. In this instance, it's actually the lack of people which is the issue, as we don't have enough people going into the professions needed to actually deliver this future that we so desire, especially when it comes to young people. And that's what we'll be talking about this week with our guest, my friend Sophie Beesley, as if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be standing here, as she really helped me get back into education and into the environmental world to begin with. So really, she's responsible for this series and most of the work I've done. So a huge thank you to her for getting me on the right track and joining us.
It's important to remember that sustainability doesn't just relate to the environment, it relates to your finances as well. That's why we switched to Beans Accountants. Beans operate on a package system, so you always know where you stand. We halved our accountancy costs when we moved to them, and one of our associates moved to them as well and reduced theirs by 2/3. With free tax advice, accountancy support, and everything else they offer, you can't go wrong. So make sure you check out Beans Accountants in the description below, and I really hope you enjoy this episode.
Sophie, fantastic to have you with us today. I've been really looking forward to having you on because you are one of the most important people, if not the most important person, for me being sat where I am now and for doing many of the things I have done. We met through a youth conservation project for the Wildlife Trust, and you really introduced me to a lot of aspects of the natural world I didn't really know about or hadn't really experienced, and I wasn't always the best behaved child, shall we say. So you really helped me there, and you got me back into education. So I'm really, really pleased to be able to have you on and to talk to you about some of the work you've been doing. So
thanks for having
welcome
me.
to the show.
Thank you.
So I really wanted to just talk to you a bit about kind of your background and how you got involved with the youth conservation projects with the Wildlife Trust, because they were really interesting and there were lots of kids from all different backgrounds there, some with various challenges and issues.
Absolutely.
And how they changed over the programme. Even me being only 16 at the time, I really noticed people change a lot, and I'd just be really interested to hear your perspective on it.
So, they were mostly vulnerable young people. It was a project set up, funded by the local council, by the Children's Services. At the time, there was quite a bit of money available before the recession, and the Wildlife Trust wanted to, the education is key, isn't it, in conservation? It is really important. You can't just go ahead and make those conservation decisions if people don't understand what you're doing and they're not behind you and not involved. So, that aspect of it was really important to the Wildlife Trust, and it still is. And so they gained funding to start this youth project. And the idea being it was quite a local project. There was 2 areas, one down the south of Hampshire and the other in the north of Hampshire. And the idea being that these vulnerable young people would be able to reconnect with nature, and that was the key. They were quite urban youngsters. A lot of them didn't know anything about the outdoors. They didn't know what creatures were what. They didn't. They'd probably never been to the sea. They're really far removed from maybe what I would have maybe taken for granted. So, the idea was to get them out doing conservation tasks, day-to-day practical things, and it was, in my opinion, a total success. I think to have that experience of reconnecting with nature does something to people, and it certainly, as you say, it did something to those young people from whatever backgrounds they came from. So as you said, some were really quite tricky. I don't know if you remember, I'm not going to obviously name names, but I think there were certain groups that were specifically sort of young offenders and things like that would come out that wouldn't have been in the group you were in, but they would come out with a lot of attitude and a lot of kind of conflicting ideas about whether they should actually engage or not. So a lot of the work I was doing was just getting them to relax and enjoy what they were doing and trusting them a little bit. I think that was a big part of it. Giving them tools which were considered, maybe a little bit dangerous to put in the hands of young people that were a bit, out of control at times. and given them that responsibility really to go and do things like scrub cutting and chopping down a tree and having a fire. And
that's what I love.
Absolutely. I bet you have memories of the smoke, the flame, the excitement of like, and not just excitement, like the hard work, like all of those aspects.
Well, it's rewarding, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, you actually see what you've done at the end of the day. You can look back. And I was talking about this recently because I work in an office now most of the time, and designing lots of really cool projects. And you get to go and see the project done, but actually it often takes so long for you to actually see the end result. Yeah. Whereas here you get an immediate, visual cue that you've done something. Absolutely. And when you get to burn stuff, it's brilliant. You're never allowed to burn things normally. Being able to burn all this stuff is fantastic, and finding out the importance of fire and learning how dangerous it actually is, it gives you a whole different respect and understanding of these things, doesn't it?
And it gave us the opportunity to then really talk to the people that needed those lessons as well. So if they were young offenders, there's the chance not to paint pictures, but there's a chance that they're the people that are going out and maybe lighting fires, for example. So to give them the responsibility and teach them about appropriate fire use, leave no trace, all the looking after the environment things, and letting them also kind of be custodians somewhat. So once they have protected that area, specifically if they're coming back to somewhere week after week and looking after it, they then hopefully, when their mates go, let's go and hang out here and light a fire, they're going to be like, I've worked really hard here. I'm going to stop them. I'm not going to do that. So there was that direct impact as well. So it wasn't just all about the young people. There was a double benefit there. So the sort of local green spaces were getting some benefit, not just from the volunteer hours that we were gaining from the young people coming out, but that message and that feeling of, I understand it now, I want to protect it now, which is what I'm all about. It's that I want to teach people, I want them to connect with nature so that they go out and protect it themselves.
Yeah, definitely. It's so important. And so much work now is about fostering ownership and that type of thing, especially in urban environments. But I think the one thing it really gave me and some of the other more difficult people that were there as well, you get a real sense of sort of vulnerability, and you realise your kind of own limitations as well. Because I remember quite well there being some people there who were trying to cut down, me included at sometimes definitely, but trying to cut down really big trees or whatever it was. And you think, this would be easy. And then actually you think, Jesus, it's actually really, really hard. Especially when you're doing it all by hand, and then you scratch yourself on something and you think, actually, it really hurts. And, and people sort of realise that actually you need to work as a team to be able to do some of these things. Teamwork, you've got to be careful with some of the tools.
So many good skills like that came out of it. You were in a really great team that was, you came out every week. Actually, how many times were you coming out now?
I don't know, every day in the end. Yeah, well, I dropped out of college, and I wasn't particularly great in school, so I dropped out of college, so I had quite a lot of spare time. And then I had a few jobs. I worked at McDonald's for a little while. Worked in Tesco. I actually quit my job at McDonald's to come volunteering because there was a point where I just thought, actually, it's just way more valuable. Luckily, I didn't need the money because, you were picking me up. Well, so I didn't have to travel anywhere. So it was really lucky, and when we did meet, when there were general pickups, I live quite near the town centre, so I could walk in. So I was quite lucky in that I didn't really need the money at the time, and I was doing other odd jobs here and there. And I started doing bits of gardening and stuff for people as well, and odd little things. So I was quite fortunate really in that sense. But, what I got from it was fantastic.
You showed a big commitment to the project. And it's no surprise that you are where you are now, because you say, that was so important. And that's great to hear, but you've come a long way, and you've got that, you've been able to see the benefit of the steps you've taken, and you committed to it from the start, which was amazing. And from that, you did loads of things on the project. So you got the Dutton Award. You were nominated for the Dutton Award because you started volunteering with the wider trust. You were in some of the other teams there. You did, remember there was like the Wild Summer Programme, so I set up, there was a summer project. So there was like a 2-week intensive summer project where a selection of the young people that had shown some promise and real sort of strong interest started, they came out for 2 consecutive weeks to do all these slightly more in-depth and interesting things, and you were helped on that. You were like youth leader on that. So yeah, that was part of the project's goal. You know, we were trying to encourage that, as well as getting people that were not necessarily going to become conservationists. They were just vulnerable young people that needed that connection. There was also that element of trying to actually, you know, find some conservationists of the future somewhat. You know, there were people that showed promise, and the hope being that, you know, they could then maybe take one of our traineeships or do something like that. So yeah, it was great. People like you were really great aspects and really helpful, and took the project forward as well. You know, you kind of influenced where it went somewhat, because we could then think about, well, what can we do for these people? John Muir Award, you did like all 3 stages of that, and you know, that was all like brought in somewhat because you were pushing for it, and it would have helped you. And that was, you know, it was great that it was that kind of organic change in the project to help whoever needed helping.
That's it, exactly.
So yeah, it was sad it came to an end.
It is really real shame, real shame. But it, you know, I think, you know, 'cause some of my friends had ended up coming as well, and getting involved, who also weren't. Some of them had dropped out of college and things too. So you know, that was really, really good to get them involved, and a lot of them, you know, really enjoyed it. But there was lots of other rewarding things as well. You know, there was lots of extra sort of curricular activities we did.
We did.
Like when we went to sort of Spinney Hollow and spent a lot of time making camping in the woods,
so
and
green
making
woodworking.
Yeah, green woodworking, making tools,
bushcraft type stuff. Did fire lighting. We did. I don't know if you were involved in something, but we did flint knapping. We did. Gosh, there were so many. Hurdle making.
Yeah, hurdle making.
That was awesome.
Stool making.
Can't remember.
I actually went back after we did the stool making one.
Yeah.
Because I kept in touch with the people, and we went and made a flat bow.
Oh,
so we spent
lovely.
spent 5 days. It's amazing how long it gives you a total different appreciation of how much time goes into making things. Because we spent 5 days and basically started with a huge pole or a huge chunk of tree, and we had to sort of knock it down with axes, and then start shaving it down, and it just took absolutely ages, and wove the string together, and then found all the right bits of wood to make the arrows, and heated them and rolled them over the fire to shape them and fletch them and all this type of thing. And then we got to try these bows out at the end, which were pretty tough, you know. Again, you know, you think at the time I was in my peak, really, you know, and I like to think, and I was sort of there straining away, not able, and I could barely pull this bow back, you know, and all of us were there struggling, you know, trying to fire these bows. But it was a pretty impressive, you know, experience, and there's so much reward in all of that, you know, the barbecues we had when we were out, being able to cook over an open fire.
And all these experiences make you, like, even if it was a volunteer that came out for one day and that was the only chance they had, I'm confident that it would be memorable to them enough that, you know, it would stick in their memories and influence them somehow, however small. I think it was a project that made big change to individuals, and I think that's really, really important.
Definitely. Definitely. And I think, you know, as I said before about giving people sort of responsibility and all that type of thing, it was really interesting to see how different people responded to it. Because some of the people like me, which are a bit louder, a bit...
confident.
Okay, confident. Yeah, let's say confident. And then there were other people who were a bit quieter.
Oh, very many.
Very, very, very quiet. And they didn't really want to ask for help. They just kind of would go to the furthest corner and work away.
They always really impressed me. There were quite a few regular volunteers that were painfully shy, awkward, silent. There were not non-verbal people, but there were people that were, you know, they didn't really communicate with anyone else in the group, and that was fine. And nobody, the camaraderie was amazing as well, because they were always people from different areas, and nobody would, you know, mind that person would just be quietly getting on. No one would, you know, have any problems with each other. Everyone would just understand you're all there for a common cause, which was amazing. But those quieter people, they always slowly came out of their shells, not to become this, you know, brash, confident person. You know, no one can work that kind of a miracle. But like you said, you always saw change, you know, and there's that development and that confidence that comes with doing something many times and becoming comfortable with it. And that kind of repeat engagement was really important to some people, and it was wonderful that they had that opportunity. Talking about something you said about the transport earlier, that was a really big part of it. It was essential that we had transport for those people that otherwise, they're stuck in their rooms, quite often playing computer, watching TV, doing whatever. Most of them, well, they were all neat, which meant not in education, employment or training. So they were all totally disengaged. Some were more vulnerable than others, but everyone wasn't. They weren't doing anything with their time. So to give them that transport, to be able to get them to the places they needed to be to do this project was really vital as well. So it's changed a lot of people.
It has, and it just seeing people come out their shell again is really rewarding. But it's the kind of what for me was really valuable was being able to be there for a long period of time, because you got to see the people. You really got to see people change. But then sometimes some people that came for the day, even over that day, you would see, where they come and they wouldn't know anyone, they'd be a bit more shy.
Just the achievement at the end, going home, that like buzz of
exactly, and also it's physical, so you've had a bit of exercise and all of that type of thing too. Really, really important.
Yeah,
really important. So why did it all come to an end? Just funding or
always the funding problem. So the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust is a charity. All the projects like that are reliant on what funding they can get, and it was council funding, like I said, children's services. So the recession struck at that point. God, don't ask for a date. 2000, we were at early 2010, 11, 12, around that time. I can't remember that exact year it ended, but the money just wasn't available. We had apply every year, and that it just came to an end, and there was nothing we could do. You can try other funding streams, but it was a specific project in a specific area, so it was very difficult to find an alternative, which is a great shame. But more projects have happened since. I'm not with the Wildlife Trust anymore, but they continue to do amazing work in education, with forest schools, and with like a lot of mental health work, so sort of taking people to the forest and working with young people and even all ages to experience the outdoors and connect them with nature. So it continues. One little project comes to an end, but it continues.
That's it. And there's lots of other places that are doing similar things.
Absolutely.
Lots of farms. My mum used to work for Laverstoke Park farm, and they had a visitor centre which they took lots of inner city kids to.
Excellent,
so they came out to the farm to see sort of farm life and get a bit involved. And again, it surprises me, and I think it would probably surprise a lot of people that are listening, that so many kids actually just have no engagement with the outdoors. I remember my mum would come back and tell me, because she worked, she didn't work with them a great deal, but she sometimes took them to the bit of the site she was working on. She was in charge of the compost sites and things. And she remembers the people there saying, they'd ask the children who's seen a tractor before. And sort of one kid would put their hand up and go, me. And they go, oh, where did you see a tractor? And they'd say, oh, I saw it on TV. And actually none of the children had ever seen a tractor. And then one of the funnier, well, for me, funnier ones was they went to the butcher's. And a little girl said, oh, where does the lamb come from? And the butcher went, oh, there's lambs out there. And she threw up on the counter because she'd never realised that lamb was lamb.
Oh, that food connection.
So,
that's a hard one.
It's really, it really is shocking. And a lot of, children didn't realise that food didn't just come from supermarkets. It grew somewhere. They just thought supermarkets made food,
I do wonder, do you think it's changing? Do you think people are becoming more aware more recently with, say, social media, or do you think it's an urban countryside divide? Or
hard to say. I like to think it's becoming more common, but that's probably because I'm much more involved in it.
That's the thing, it's hard to take a judgment when you're so involved in it. I think it's hard to see the other side.
It is, but there's also so many projects, there's so many sort of urban food projects. The big thing that worries me is schools. I still don't think schools are really doing enough to get kids involved, and it should be a part of the curriculum. And we had Merrick Denton Thompson on, fantastic guy, and he founded the Learning Through Landscapes Trust with Sir David Attenborough. So he was talking a lot about that. And Rob here, our cameraman, he actually went to one of the schools that they founded and set up. So he's got some fantastic experiences of that school.
Amazing.
And it really benefited him. And it's really interesting how now we're starting to bump into so many of these people that have done all these interesting things and the commonalities there.
I think, well, I'm pretty certain there's work being done currently it's I can't remember if they call it a natural history. I think it might be just called natural history, but the GCSE is coming. They are hoping to have that kind of natural science element coming into school. I think that's too late, GCSE, personally, but it's something. And I think you're absolutely right. It's absolutely crucial that it starts in school, because you can leave only so much to a parent, and parents are responsible for most of a child's life. But schools used to have a real, it wasn't much else, to be honest, but schools used to always be about nature. You know, they talking Victorian times really, but you know, you'd go out, you'd do a nature walk, you'd pick things up, you'd take it back to the classroom, you'd learn about it. It was easy, it was your local area. People didn't go far because they didn't travel far, but it was all about just understanding what was around you and just that connection. And it's gone, you know. I mean, I have kids, they do welly walks, and we're very fortunate. We live somewhere quite rural, so they do have that connection, and I'm not going to let them not have that connection, to be honest. But still, some schools have forest school engagement, many don't. And ultimately, if those teachers are not interested in nature themselves, they're not going to pass knowledge to those children just automatically. You know, it should just be an automatic connection. I know about these things, and we're talking about this, so it means this in nature, or you know, just all those links. If we're going to always be taught by people that don't have that knowledge because they weren't connected, who's going to teach these kids?
Yeah, exactly. It's very tough. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a downward spiral, really, isn't it?
Where does it?
And that's the real challenge. You know, and a lot of urban schools, they have real problems now because, again, I think Merritt talks about it on the podcast with him, but they've removed the sort of statutory protection for playing fields now.
Wow.
So there's a real risk of a lot of the playing fields on schools being removed. So kids might actually lose some of the only outdoor space they have, which is tragic.
Yeah.
You know, and it's such a disaster. And, you know, the only option really, I think, as I said, is for kids sort of in schools to get more involved. But it doesn't have to be a forest school. You know, it can just be lessons outdoors and all this type of thing.
Yeah.
You know, we used to love having lessons outside. I was quite lucky because our school had some big playing fields because we were in a bit of, not rural, but we're in a town. You know, that was really great when we did that, but it was very, very rare.
Yeah.
And there's so much evidence now to show that kids actually learn more effectively when they're outdoors, that bullying tends to be less, this type of thing, and they're a bit more respectful and attentive. Even though you'd think they'd be more distracted, it's not really the case.
Absolutely not the case.
And there tends to be less stress as well. So there's a huge range of benefits. And again, some of the work that Merrick's been involved with, you know, they've now got guidelines to teach 80% of the curriculum outdoors.
Yeah.
So, you know, all that stuff's available. We'll put it in the link for this episode, so people can find it. And, you know, it's a huge resource for teachers. But I think the problem is awareness. Again, partly why we wanted to do this series is there's all this stuff is going on, but you often just don't hear about it, which is the real problem. You know, and that in itself is a real challenge.
Yeah. I think we have to target people at all ages. You know, there's only so many people that are preaching the word of conservation and, you know, and that the importance of nature, but it is growing like monumentally. I think everyone is waking up to the fact we've got to do something and the problems that we're facing. I think you know, the smallest children in schools are being taught about, you know, make sure you recycle, plastic in the ocean, all those good messages. So if we get those in, even, you know, if it's a science lesson and something's mentioned, just getting it in whatever little ways we can, it will start to have an effect. And we've seen that, like, young people are starting to stand up and look towards the future. And, you know, Greta, you know, we've all seen the movement of young people standing up and doing what they should be doing, and good for them. You know, that we're aging now. We need to hand over that baton and support them to lead forward now. So that's
definitely
really important.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it gives, you know, the one thing I've thought a lot about is one of the main things I kind of got for it, and I think it was purpose, really. It kind of gave me a purpose and like an objective and something to kind of work towards, which has sort of driven me forward since then. And I think that's what a lot of people end up with. And I think it's what a lot of people have realised they've lost. You know, talking to a lot of my friends who are a bit depressed or don't know what to do with their jobs, it comes down to a crisis of purpose, I think, a lot of the time. And I think this is an area which offers huge purpose and promise and all of these type of things, which will really help people.
I agree.
But it's just getting them engaged.
Well, that's the reason I went into conservation. I was in an office. I was in that place where I went to uni. I actually came from an urban environment, right under the flight path of Heathrow Airport. But there were pockets of nature, you know, and I was very much aware of them. When I spent time in them, you know, I can feel how it felt. You know, there was a small meadow near our house. There was some canalised rivers next to the airport, but I would go down there with a dinghy, and it was probably cleaner than it is these days. The airport's grown hugely, but mucking about in the river, you know, that connection with natural elements, water, the grass, the trees, all of that was there, even in an urban environment. And I'm sure it's shrinking, but hopefully, you know, that connection stays with people. And then, you know, I got older, I did normal routes, went through university, didn't really know what to do. But something inside of me was still connected with nature. And then worked in an office, did a lot of traveling. That was a big influence on my life. And just got to the point where I knew that I had to get involved and I had to change everything and retrain and get involved in conservation. So you did it a bit earlier than me, but I think a lot of people are doing that. I think it's not unusual to reassess when you are in that office environment, in that boring drudgery of life, to want something that is fulfilling and, like you say, kind of gives you not an instant boost, but a connection. It's always the word connection it comes back to. Yeah.
I hope you've enjoyed the episode so far. Here's a quick message from one of our sponsors. Make sustainability a priority throughout the design process with a suite of tools built specifically for landscape architecture and design. Vectorworks gives you the freedom to follow your imagination wherever it may lead, with remarkably flexible software that integrates BIM for landscape and GIS workflows. Sketch, model, and document in a single tool with the world's most design-centric BIM solution. Discover Vectorworks' landmark and design without limits. Visit vectorworks.net to learn more.
That's it, definitely. But you know, your background from there on was really interesting. You know, you've been all over the world. You looked at things in Borneo. So could you talk a bit about some of those experiences that helped kind of push you down this route?
Yeah. So, do you know what? I was thinking about this the other day. I had a stack of National Geographic magazines on my bookcase in my room. And it was a tall bookcase that went right up to the ceiling. So I couldn't necessarily access them all the time, but I had a cabin bed so I could see them all the time. So I'd think about them a lot. And one of them had on the front cover, and this was in the 80s. I was born in 1980, right? So it was an issue from like 1980 or something. And it had a bowl, like a washing up bowl, a baby orangutan and a baby in the bowl. And this picture, I just loved this article. It was all about Baruti Gaudakas, who is an orangutan. Well, she's very famous. She led she was one of the Leakey girls. So the three, Diane Fossey, I forget her name, very famous, with the chimpanzees. I'll come back to it. And Baruti, so she was the orangutan lady who went out to Borneo. She was a young girl at the time. And they all did their bits. There was the gorillas, the chimpanzees, and the orangutans. And this article just blew me away. I just remember thinking about it a lot. But then you forget. It doesn't mean anything the rest of your life. It's just a thing, and it becomes one of those memories. Anyway, while I was at uni, back then we didn't really do year out. That was a sort of little bit later on. But I decided during my summer one year that I would travel, like properly travel. I think I'd been one place before that on my own, sort of not too far away. I'd only ever been on a plane once, not with my family, because we didn't do planes.
No, I've never been abroad with my family ever.
No. It was just, you know, it wasn't the thing. So I went through all the adventure brochures and just dreaming, what one can I can pick any one. I've saved up and I can pick any one of these adventure trips. And I picked Borneo. I was like, it's got everything: orangutans, caves, bats, rivers, the Iban people, the local tribal people. And I was just like, I can't, this is just the most amazing thing. I'm going to just do it. And I signed up for it. And I went to Borneo, and I was 20 years old, which now is probably quite old. Like, you know, everyone goes now, but it was quite a thing. And it just changed my life, like unbelievably so. It just opened my eyes. And I mean, I knew about all these places. I had an interest in the world. I had an interest in it all, and obviously in wildlife. But it was just books and TV and David Attenborough and all, you know, everyone's got that interest. But going to Borneo just did something. Whatever it was like, wow, this is the most amazing place on earth, and I want to come back here and be here forever. So that was kind of like, I came back and that was it. I wasn't that interested in uni anymore. I realised, because I studied graphic design, I was like, I'm not sure this is for me. It's kind of cutthroat, not very nice, not really interested in it. But I finished it, but then I just got a normal, boring office job. But everything I earned, apart from bills and things like that, was savings went towards travel. And I travelled and I travelled and I travelled. And got to the point where it was like, well, I'm just travelling and seeing these places and witnessing these conservation efforts and doing these bits and bobs. I can't keep doing this. I need to be actually making a difference somewhere. And that's when it was like, okay, I'm coming home. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to retrain. And yeah, it was the best thing I ever did. I'm sure lots of people will agree. You've had a lot of changes, a lot of...
Yeah.
Just a few. Yeah, it's important to change. Change is important.
It is, yeah. I mean, I did sport at school, and I really didn't. Well, I didn't really do much at school. My predicted grades were U for some of my lessons, which is ungraded. So yeah, I did okay in the end, but not as good as I probably should have done. And then I went to college and studied sport and just thought, sod this, rather just not do anything. So I dropped out of college. Then obviously I met you and started doing conservation work, and I got involved with all of those things. And then again, like you just said, it was kind of like you want to make a difference and you kind of want to do something. And I always kind of wanted to do something more, but I didn't know what it really was. So then you got me to go back to college, and thank you very much for that, by the way. You got me back into college, so I studied forestry. And then same kind of thing, I became a member of I was invited to go to an event by the Royal Forestry Society, which is fantastic, and everyone should join it. It's amazing. And really, really interesting. Went on a few talks and walks, and that's where I met people like Ted Green, who's also been on the podcast, and quite a few other interesting people. And I found out a lot about the natural world and the issues it faces. And I kind of thought, well, actually, this is great. And I kind of went into the work. And then same as you, I saved up a bit of money, and I found out about this trip to Costa Rica. But it was to learn about how they had approached regenerating Costa Rica, because it only had about 20% forest cover. I can't remember any of the dates, but it had a very, very low forest cover, not massively higher than what we've got here. And now they've got 70-something%. Phenomenal. So we went and we looked at the programs and things they put in place to try and regenerate the environment there, basically. And that was fascinating, and a lot of it came down to water in the end. So they came up with lots of ideas to try and restructure sort of the country. And the way I understand it is basically they had this problem of everyone was cutting the trees down. And so they decided to go in and they went, no one can cut any trees down anymore. We want to have a greener economy. We want to try and regenerate the country. No one can cut any trees down. But then no one could make any money off the land, so because everyone was living off the land, because it's basically a third world country. Well, it is a third world country. So people were still cutting all the trees down to grow pineapples, and they kind of realised that this just wasn't going to work because people had no choice. So what they did was they decided to find a way to pay people for the services the land provided. So they basically figured out that they had huge potential for hydropower. So they thought, okay, we want a green economy, based around tourism and that type of thing. How do we get there? Well, we've got to regenerate the environment. How do we fund that? Well, it's hydropower. So they put lots of investment into hydropower. And because it's rainforest and lots of water comes from tree transpiration that people don't realise, that the trees actually produce water. So they invested in the trees to produce the water to power the hydro, and they paid people for that service. And that premise ecosystem services is basically exactly what public money for public good should or will be here. So, and I was very fortunate that I found out a lot about that early, and that led to me talking to a lot of people later on in my career in the government and various other places. I'm not saying I had really anything to do with it, but I was constantly saying, well, actually, surely there's got to be payments for these things and all that type of thing. And obviously, thousands of other people were doing the same thing, and people knew about it all over the world. So those things sort of really started to filter through, and those kind of experiences, seeing the problems they had and how we really have similar problems here, was really helpful. So I managed to take a lot of those principles forward. And then I came back, worked in forestry, and then I went into project management. I went into project management after that, and I got to be on site doing lots of things, but it was mainly for developers, just clearing sites and destroying things, really, which was obviously not what I wanted to do. But I wanted to learn the project management side because they're involved in a lot of the actual practical side of things and seeing how things go. So I got involved with that. And then I got meningitis, which sort of put a massive hamper on everything, as you do. And it kind of really messed me up for a few years. And I kind of mentally as well, I wasn't quite right for a while, I don't think, looking back. So I basically lost my job and then went back into forestry, but couldn't do that because I wasn't well enough and I was very sick. I could only work half a day for a week, otherwise I'd be crippled for the whole week. So I decided, okay, what can I do with the 3 years I've got? I can do a degree. So then I found out about landscape architecture and did that. And, that's how that kind of went, really.
Sometimes it just falls into place. Sometimes you got to make the changes. Sometimes they just happen. It's almost, I love change. Like, it's really important to me. And I'm probably the most settled and stable I've been throughout my life in terms of like wanting to change things and try different things. And I think that's quite healthy. I'm quite keen on expanding and seeing how far that we can go and learn. I'm into learning. I'm into change and learning, making sort of things come alive and not just kind of reading about them and learning in that way, but actually thinking, well, I've learned about that and I want to know it and I want to do it and I want to experience it. So I guess when I went back to train, it wasn't that I wanted a degree. I didn't want to get a PhD. I wasn't interested in that. I just wanted that stepping stone to get out in the field and do. It was all about the doing. So I did like an HND. I don't know what the equivalent would be these days.
Still HND.
Is there still HNDs?
I think so, yeah.
It's the equivalent of like a foundation degree. So it's kind of like that first part of a degree without the dissertation, something like that. So it was quite, it was intense. And I loved it. And I knew that I'd done absolutely the right thing. I was a mature student, actually there was someone older on the course. It's one of those things that draws a lot of people back into it, I think. But it was awesome, and it gave me a really good foundation to then find work. But coming back to that Borneo story, that's where I wanted to be. I just had at that stage, I was just like interested in rainforests. I was interested in orangutans specifically for some reason. There was, everyone, they're quite enigmatic. It's easy to be interested in them. But just generally rainforests and the tropics, that kind of, that habitat, that ecosystem was of real interest to me. So, as soon as I finished my course, I was like, right, I need to find a job out there. Very fortunately, came across an advert almost immediately to do a seasonal job out in Indonesian Borneo. So Borneo is divided into two parts. You've got Malaysia at the top, and then the big bottom half is Indonesia. And they said they'd have me. I went to interview and was very fortunate to get the role. And so, like, within a matter of 2 weeks, I think it was, I was like, I had to be out in Borneo. It was amazing. That is so me. I love it. I love that kind of spontaneousness. That I don't say no to things like that. So, I went and straight away dropped in it pretty much. I was in a peat swamp forest. So that kind of habitat is hard. And that, again, that appeals to me. the whole area is peat, which we know it's carbon sequestration. It's locking up a lot of carbon. It's very wet. There's a bit of history that the government had decided in their in their wisdom to cut canals into this peat to drain it, to try and make it usable as farming land. Obviously loads of deforestation, so cutting down the trees but draining the peat. Absolute, the most horrific thing you could possibly do. Drained peat becomes just basically something that wants to burn. So they created this tinderbox, and every year basically loads of Southeast Asia and a lot of Borneo, it just burns. Fires start, the peat emits tons and tons of CO2 into the atmosphere, and the climate is being wrecked partly because of it. These ill-informed, ill-educated decisions that are made up high to help people are, often absolutely the wrong thing to do. So anyway, this wonderful project, back then called OTROP, the Orangutan Tropical Research Project, it was all about the Sabangau National Park. So they'd managed to preserve, or permission to preserve, this gorgeous area of peat swamp forest, which was home to the largest population of wild orangutans. So it was absolutely incredible. And this research station where I was based, they'd cut a transect system into the forest, and there were scientists there who were going out following orangutans every day, doing orangutan nest surveys. We were also looking at the trees themselves. We were looking at fruiting data. We were taking measurements. I led students to do, I didn't say, I was basically, my role was to do similar that I did in the youth project. I was coordinating the youth, not necessarily youth, but I was coordinating the young people that were coming out to do their research in the forest. So it was a volunteer type program, but they were usually students from universities. And they were coming out with their little projects, which were all wonderful and interesting and varied. And they were getting involved within all the research that was going on, but also implementing their own research if that was their goal. So we did butterfly capture release, we did all sorts of wonderful projects. And yeah, we would be out every day in these tough conditions, no leeches, thankfully, but plenty of mozzies. We were walking miles and miles and miles into this humid peat swamp forest, collecting data all day long, coming back absolutely sweaty, exhausted. It was great. People think that sounds terrible, but it was just wonderful that in there doing frontline stuff, but not just that, supporting other people in their journeys to be conservationists. Like, it couldn't be more perfect. It was wonderful. But like all good things, it came to an end. It was a seasonal thing. So I enjoyed my time there, and then came back to the UK, and suddenly, whoa, this is a very different environment, and you have to readapt. So it was like, okay, what can I do? I'm here. What jobs can I get in conservation? And that was harder. There's now, I'd say, a lot more competition, but back then quite a bit of competition for jobs in conservation. Is that something you've ever found?
Yeah, well, I remember I was really annoyed actually, because I applied for some jobs with the Wildlife Trust.
Oh, really?
And I didn't get them.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I did. When I was, but I was just starting in my career. So I was still very, very junior, and I hadn't really, I think it probably would have been my first proper job, I would have thought. So, I'm not surprised I didn't get it really. But at the same time, I really wanted it.
Yeah.
But I've been very, very lucky, and I've been luckier than most because I'm quite loud, I think. And I've been to a lot of the jobs I've had, I've been offered, not applied for. And a lot of them have been through meeting people.
Yes.
I've been to lots of conferences, and I've kind of gone, well, hang on a minute, actually, surely we should think about this way or whatever. And just sort of stood up and said it. And being and quite often I'd be the only young person at a lot of these things. And there'd be a lot of directors of companies and all of this type of thing there. And they'd sort of say, actually, who do you work for? And I'd say, oh, I don't work for anyone. And they'd be like, oh, well, why don't you come work for us? So, I was really lucky in that respect. And that's happened a few times. Or I went to see companies to find out what they were doing, and I sort of said, "Oh, actually, do you have a job? Any jobs?" And they were like, "Oh, actually, yeah. Do you want? How about next week?"
Very confident.
So I was quite lucky in that I kind of had that confidence to go and do that. But also, I was very lucky to meet a lot of these people. And I'm not really a believer in fate, but I do seem to have a habit of just bumping into people in obscure places. And it happens quite frequently.
That feeds into my change thing. I think if you put yourself out there, if you're going stale, if you see things aren't happening and you put yourself out there and you're confident and you meet people, always you have a conversation. Like, that communication is so key. You start talking to someone, and invariably, if they've got something in common, if there's something happening and you show willing, even, I don't know, those little connections, they start to add up. And I mean, this podcast shows clearly, like, there's links, massive links to it. And then you start knowing the main people and the main industries and who does what where, and it all starts fitting together. And if you're not going to engage in that, if you're not going to be the person that steps forward and makes themselves known, it's much, much harder.
It is. It absolutely is. And, as you say, you've got to get out there and do these things. Unfortunately, you do have to get out there and do these things. Things that don't just fall in your lap.
Yeah.
And one great example is I went to a Royal Forestry event, and we were talking about forestry as what you do at these events. And I was talking to this one lady in the car park, and she said, "Oh, actually, I've just bought a farm." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And she said, "Do you want to come and look after it for me?" And she offered me a job in a house. And then I moved in like 2 weeks later, I think. And I moved into this farm and, helped look after the farm for a few months. So,
Nice.
It was a great experience. Right place, right time.
Yeah.
And Ted, who we had on the podcast, fascinating guy, really famous in the tree and environmental world. He's a character in books and all this type of thing. Met him at one of the same events. And met the people that we ended up going to Costa Rica with, and then I went to Northeast America again on another trip, and I met lots of really interesting people there. But again, on one of those trips, I met the director. I'm not sure if he's still the director, but one of the directors of Westonbirt Arboretum, which is National Arboretum. And then he was like, "Oh, well, why don't you get?" Actually, when I went to America, it was the middle of my dissertation, and I thought, actually, dissertation is not that important, so I'll leave that. And I went to America instead to look at all this, what they were doing to respond to a lot of the challenges they've got there. And I met this director, and then he was like, "Oh, why don't you organise some trips?" And I came back, and then we sorted some trips out with the university. So we did some trips to Westonbirt Arboretum to have a look around there. So, again, it's a lot of opportunity to just meet people and sort of actually take people up on their offer as well. Because I think a lot of the time people say things and you often think, "Oh, they don't really mean it." But my view is if they've said it, it's kind of like a promise. So if you say something, "Why don't you do this?" I do hold people to things. So
so careful what you say around Niall.
Yeah, careful what you say around me, exactly. Like with this podcast, a lot of people said, yeah, sure, we'll come and chat on it. And I was like,
and here I have to be.
Exactly. Yeah, and not only that, we've come to where you live, so you have no chance to escape. But if you don't do that, things don't happen. And I think a lot of people appreciate that too. And that's why I've ended up in the positions I have done, because, for the Landscape Institute, I became one of their, on their board of directors and board of trustees, sorry. And I was the first non-chartered person on that board. Then I became the rep to the International Federation of Landscape Architects and had a seat on the World and European Council. There's not many other 20-year-olds that have done those things. So, 24 or whatever I was, 23, something like that. So, but it's only because I would push and find myself in these situations. And I always thought, and I've always had this view of, I want to make more of a difference. How do I get to the next thing to kind of have an impact? And now it's this podcast. We've kind of reached a point where I've thought, well, actually, if other people are not going to do this, I'm going to do it, because otherwise it's not going to happen. So, and that's kind of the mentality I've got now.
I think people see the honesty as well. I don't think you can fake that. I think if you've got passion and drive, people can feel it and they understand it. So they will give you the opportunities. I don't think you can really fake that. I think it's easy to see the people that are kind of maybe either just doing it for themselves rather than doing it for the environment, or they're just really not that into it and it's maybe just a job for them. I don't know.
Yeah, perhaps. I think there's definitely that too. But I think people are driven by different things as well. I know some people that are very, very compassionate but it holds them back.
Yeah,
And
that's
they
true.
actually, I don't think they could necessarily do as much as they could because they're too compassionate.
Yeah.
And me, I'm very frustrated.
Yeah.
And, people ask me what drives me, and I used to think maybe it was fear. I was worried about what's going to happen in the future. I've just had a baby. I really want to make sure there's a good world for her and she can do the things I've had the chance to do. But at the same time, I'm really pissed off that things are not being done properly. And I just get to a point where I just think, for God's sake, I'll just do it myself.
Yeah.
And I think I've kind of developed more of that mentality, which also caused me a lot of problems in education, especially with unis and things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, look what we're achieving, what we're doing. It's, those things can be really valuable as well if you can point them in the right direction.
It takes all people. It really does.
Yeah, it does. We need a mix of mentalities and approaches, and a lot of people in the environment are quite what's the word, quiet. I would say quiet.
I know many. I think you have, you need all personalities.
You do,
people on the front line, but there are people like the most intellectual, knowledgeable and passionate people I know in conservation are the naturalists. They are absolutely obsessed with the things that they're interested in, and they are committed to it, and it's wonderful to see. And they don't need to go out there talking to everyone and anyone, because that's their thing and that's what they want to do. And there's space for everybody.
There is, there absolutely is, and we have to have everybody, because there's such a myriad of things to do, and it's really important. But I think the one thing I've noticed is I don't think there's enough people that are really loud. Which is, again, I think why I've been quite lucky, because again, I put myself in these positions and there's not so many other people that do. Or there are, but they're in very niche areas or already very, sort of specialized or whatever. So I think people that are introverted is the word I was looking for. I think a lot of people are quite introverted. And I think that, that creates a big opportunity for people to come in and really shake things up and help move things along and support those people and all that type of thing. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see how it will pan out.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the next thing I wanted to ask you about really was your kids, because
I
have to say I look at how you've raised your kids in awe, really, because obviously I've got a little 6-week-old baby, 7 weeks, God, 7 weeks now. Christ, it's gone quick. I don't know where the last week's gone. And I really want her to, to be honest, I want to try and raise her in a similar way to have you raise your kids, because I think it's really important and it's really amazing to see. And the pictures you post are fantastic. There's one I actually I've been meaning to ask if I can use it in presentations, but there's one I always remember, and I always show it to my wife, is you and the kids in your canoe on top of a
very high aqueduct.
Yeah, very high aqueduct.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, so I just wondered if you could tell us a bit about the adventures you've gone. You've written for a book as well. Which I haven't read yet, but it's on my list. About adventures with the kids and all this type of thing. So if you could just tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back a little bit, I guess. So came back to the UK, worked with the Wildlife Trust. Whilst I was working with the Wildlife Trust, I was of an age of having children. So had kids, as you do. Worked for me. And I wasn't going to change my life just because I had kids. And I totally appreciate that some people have to, and all children are different. But I was determined, whatever happened, that I would continue to live my life the way I wanted to live my life. Somewhat selfishly, probably. That's up for debate, really. But they've turned out all right so far. So I'm quite happy with my choices. I started off just straight, I'm quite a nurturing person as well. So it's not like straight away I was like, right, they got to sleep through the night. We're going to just cart them off to other people so I can go out having adventures. That's not me. I love children. Not always. I didn't always when I was younger, but I've been very much involved with young people, children, teaching, and informally, formally. So when I had my own, it was a no-brainer that they would come and do all those things with me. It wasn't me and them. We're together. So we just started small. It was stick them in a carrier and still get out there.
Yeah.
It's harder. It's so much harder. That's my advice to you. Don't give up, because it's hard.
Yeah.
But it's your outlook at the end of the day. And if you know it's going to get better, and that the more you do it, the more they're going to find that a normal thing to do, then you will have, I think, less trouble down the line. So yeah, we've done lots of adventures. We, when they were little, we camped with them. We actually avoided kayaking and canoeing when they were really tiny. But we travelled, we didn't stop travelling. Travel's a big part of my life. Where was the first? We started quite small, I suppose. We went to Madeira, we went to some islands. We did adventurous things while we were there, lots of hiking, but with some off days. But as they got a little bit bigger, not much bigger, we went to places like Sri Lanka. It's like, let's just try. And it was hard. Like, looking back on it, we coped and we enjoyed the country still, and we enjoyed all the experiences. But we pushed the kids maybe a little too hard. I think Perry was maybe 1.5, and Thorn would have been, so Perry, Peregrine, Thorn, strange names, but the nature link. So Peregrine was maybe 1.5. Thorn was like, so he would have been 3.5. And they were hot. They were like sick for a lot of it at the start. They were laying in bed, sort of feverish. We worried a lot. We were kind of, shall we get a doctor? We tried to make all the right decisions. We moved to a cooler, hilly area, and things got better. Like, we never plan anything. It was very much go to Sri Lanka.
Figure it out when you're there.
Figure it out when we were there. And it was fine. We made the right decisions. We kept them in mind the whole time. And ultimately, people there were incredible, extremely welcoming, helped with the kids. It was very much backpacking and roughing it, but with kids, and it was great. Looking back on it, it's hard but great, and we just continued. I really had that dream to take them to Borneo, and we did it. We just thought, why not? So again, the Borneo story is the one I wrote about in the book. It's a Brad travels guide collection of stories called Kidding Around. So they were looking for writers to contribute to a book of travel stories that were interesting and about parents that were adventurous with their kids. So my particular story was about when we were in Borneo. So we literally had no plan. We booked a flight, and I think we left within 10 days or something, because we do things quite last minute. Hey, why not? Make it even harder. So we booked a flight. We got to Borneo. We had our first night booked, because you can't turn up somewhere without somewhere to sleep. And I had a rough idea of what we'd like to do, but we had nothing booked. So yeah, we arrived. We started journeying across. We were in Sabah, so we were in Malaysian Borneo at this time. And we wanted to get across I can't remember. We were into the Kinabatangan River, which is this beautiful stretch of river. And geez, to mention, when I went back to Borneo, it changed so dramatically. It was horrendous to see. We were driving on, we just got on public buses, and we were on these public buses going past miles and miles and miles of palm oil plantations. And there was a lot of logging when I was there. I remember when I was 20 and first there, the logging, like it being, like at that stage we could only really use logging roads to get into the forest. There was not much infrastructure. It was less developed. When I returned with the kids, it was so different. And I'd been back previous to that as well. I'd been there before that and returned. But this time it was so developed and destroyed, and it was horrendous. Anyway, I digress. We were on this bus going to the Kinabatangan River to do this jungle camp, as you do with little kids. And we had no idea when our bus was going to arrive. We were just sat in the burning hot sun waiting for this bus all day long. And I wrote a story about waiting for a bus, basically, because how many people do that? How many people would take that risk these days to backpack and travel to a country and just sit and wait for a bus and be not actually that sure if they were going to get where they wanted to go that night? So we waited all day. This bus that the locals had told us was going to come didn't come. We waited in the sun a bit longer. We found somewhere to get some lunch, and we were in the middle of pretty much nowhere at that point. It wasn't a city. It wasn't anything. So, but it was great. Those days, are the most memorable, strangely.
Yeah.
The people that walked by and asked if we were okay, the people that just helped out, all the little things that happen. We eventually got on the bus way, way, way later than we even kind of thought we should, thinking we'll probably still get there. At this point, I should say, we'd booked a night in this. So we'd called the day before to this place that was amazing, a cooperative in the middle of the jungle. And they ran this little kind of lodge, this little camp on this lovely oxbow lake. So we were heading there and they were expecting us, and we knew that we wouldn't immediately get there. When we got there, we had to get in a boat to get to the camp in the middle of the forest. It's like, are we actually going to make this? Well, let's just go. We'll be fine. So we got on this bus and there was no seats. Well, there were. The ones right at the very back at the emergency exit, which was closed with a piece of string that kept swinging open. No joke. So we were sat on these seats, two little kids, and this door kept opening next to us, literally next to us. Pair of the driver's pants hanging on the window curtain, like literally where they were drying in the sun. I was like, hey, it's an adventure. And the toilets, like, it was the back of the bus, toilets right there that absolutely stank. So it was an eventful journey and took a long, long time. We got there in the dark and we managed to find our hosts and amazing people. And they said, oh, you know, we might probably not going to be able to get out to camp. You might have to just stay in the local village for the night. Well, that's fine. Doesn't bother us. Whatever works. You know, we can pay for a bed somewhere, whatever. And they said, no, do you know what? We can take you. And it was dark, like actually dark. We had our head torches on at this point. I don't know what the time was, maybe like 8 p.m. because it gets dark around, 6 o'clock. I said, yeah, go on then. Why not? Let's do it. And it was amazing. We all put on little life jackets. The kids were awake. They'd already been asleep and they woke up and they were like, where are we going? Are we going? What? We're going on a boat. Oh, okay. Because they're pretty resilient. You can imagine. Like, they've been built to be pretty resilient. So we're in this boat and we're going down a river in the pitch black in the Borneo jungle. And, you know, looking around, there's crocodiles everywhere. Is amazing. You know, that you got this experience that you would not have got if you had booked a holiday to Borneo, you know, and that's what's important to us. The reality and the adventurousness and giving our children those experiences that, talk about privilege, you know, I'm talking about that we are so lucky to have these experiences in our memories, but our children hopefully will have these incredible memories. Even if they haven't got vivid memories of it, it will build their characters.
Yeah.
So yeah, we got to this camp, we had an amazing time. It was great. They walked their socks off, they're little troopers. And everything we do is like that. Like you said, we've borrowed an origami canoe. We didn't know how to...
I hope.
It wasn't paper, but it was near enough. You know that kind of plasticky, kind of corrugated material?
Oh, yeah.
Basically that, and some straps. And we said, yeah, we'll give it a go. So we borrowed it, constructed it. We didn't have instructions. Put it together. We're pretty handy, so that was fine. And then we all paddled across the highest aqueduct up in Wales. I can't pronounce it, Ponticlister or something. Yeah, adventures, little adventures, mini adventures. When you have kids, you have to make the most of all that time because there's so many good things that you can do and enjoy. Micro adventures at home, big adventures abroad. We'll put an end to that recently, but it's important in my opinion, and we've been able to keep doing the things we love, but together it's great.
No, it's really important. I keep saying, me and the wife keep saying, you know, Elisa has got to conform to our lifestyle, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And you know, that's kind of the mentality we're taking with her, is she's going to have to just do what we do. You know, maybe not right now because she's only 6 weeks old, 7 weeks old, but you know, soon, soon she will conform to our lifestyle. And you know, she's going to have to travel as well because I mean, my wife's family are in Belarus, near Chernobyl, and near the exclusion zone, and which is a nightmare to get to. And then I think it took us like 36 hours last time to get there. It's just such a nightmare to get. Considering it's in Europe, it's ridiculous. And now we can't even fly into the country because the air travel's banned. So it's even more complicated. We've got to go to Moscow, then go then get the bus, and then get another bus.
Blimey.
But her other family live in St. Petersburg, which is only a few hours away. So we're spending 2 months there this year. Well,
Question: what do you do when school rears its ugly head?
That's a good question.
This is a thing I think a lot of people that are adventurous and want to work abroad, travel abroad. What do you do once school comes around?
I don't know. I think she'll have to go to school, because the big problem is I don't think me or Yulia will have time to sort of homeschool her, really.
Yeah.
But we are also thinking of sending her to study in Russia,
Okay.
because not because we want all of our free time back, that'd be nice, but because we think it's really important. And the Russian schooling is very different to the British schooling. And I have to say, I'm really impressed with like a lot of the Russian kids. Like, they are on it, and they're really like motivated. It's like they have a very different mentality to what we do. And I think that mentality is really, it's more my mentality, I think. And my wife certainly has that mentality as well. Very hard, kind of. I'm not saying it's all good, but I think the approach and what they learn is, I think it's more advanced than what we learn here.
Okay.
And a lot of the degrees, and well, I'm not saying I want her to study in Russia either. She can obviously make her own choice, but I think a lot of the degrees and things, it's a very difficult decision, and it's going to be a very political decision for people. Leave some comments if you like, but I think the degrees are probably better, but they're not recognised here.
Yeah.
So there's a very difficult decision, you know. I think the education in some ways is more practical. It's more of a practical education than we get here, which is more esoteric. There's a lot of those values that I really want her to kind of pick up.
Yeah, it's all about values.
So I think we're going to try and spend a lot of time between, but it might be that she spends summer in Russia and summer and Christmas. So we might spend a couple of months or a month or so in summer, and then Christmas as well. And the rest of the year she'll be here.
It certainly gets difficult. Life does change, not necessarily just once you have kids, but once schooling becomes a thing. Because a lot of people, you know, they world school, you know, it's just traveling, and they think that the experience of travel is enough of an education. I totally appreciate that. I respect that opinion. I just don't think I could do it myself, because I have quite a fond memories of school, and the formality of schooling isn't abhorrent to me. Like it is for some people. It's an easy decision for them. They don't, you know, they can homeschool and things because they maybe had bad experiences of school, but for me, I think school was a great benefit to me, so I find it hard to think about taking them out of school. However, I would very much like to travel long term with them at some point, if that becomes an opportunity, if that opportunity arises.
Yeah, it's interesting as well with home working, because I mean, me and my wife both have our own companies, so I'm very lucky that I can work from anywhere. I worked from Russia 2 months last year because we got stuck there because of coronavirus, so I had no choice. But that was fine, because our company was set up before COVID to be a virtual company, basically. So we always have worked wherever we are. So we're very lucky. And, you know, but my partner, her business, she works full time, but she has like a side business, is making stuff, you know, leather stuff, belts, braces, handbags, that type of thing. And obviously we can't do that when we're away. So that throws up a slight challenge, really. So there is still a bit of a challenge there. And obviously she works for a proper company as well. And, you know, she can work from home, and she does, and she probably will continue to. But a lot of big companies have lots of rules about working abroad, especially when it comes to Russia and Belarus. Like, for example, Belarus, you're not allowed to take encrypted laptops into. And they'll be destroyed at the airport.
Interesting.
So that's a big problem, because we tried to work there the other year. I did, because I don't have an encrypted laptop, but she was working on government projects, so she couldn't. So, you know, it becomes, which is an irony.
Yeah.
The Russian citizen working on. Yeah. But anyway, it's you know, it's interesting. So, you know, lots of different challenges, but they're all achievable, and it's just how much you push. And then maybe you look at other countries. You know, we've been looking to buy a house, and you know, I'm 28. My wife's recently moved to the UK she's from quite a poor background, shall we say. Neither of us really have a great deal of money, so we're in a very difficult position where you think, actually, do I buy a house? And actually you look at the houses here and you look at the houses in Russia, you can get a hell of a lot more for your money in Russia, it's, in a lot of ways. And you start thinking, well, actually, do we live here? Do we live there? And then you start thinking, well, actually, if we live in Europe, Italy or somewhere, again, a lot of good value for money. It's quite an interesting environment as well. Maybe we look at working somewhere like that and working remotely because our job lets us work remotely. So, I think that's going to have a really big impact as well. And I know an awful lot of people that are sort of thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Do we carry on working the way we are? Do we move away? Because actually, okay, there's your support network and things which are really important, but actually 90% of the time, you're still you and your family, isn't it? So it's kind of like, how do we think about those things? What are the options? And that's what we're working on at the moment. We're looking at alternative options to try and get the best of both worlds by building a house.
I think you need to learn to adapt massively. It's about being able to adapt to all sorts of situations. I mean, I took the quite traditional, I suppose, decision to, when I had both of my children, I decided to stay at home for a while and enjoy them and bring them up for a little while, not too long, like an extra year on top of maternity. But then you have that kind of worry of, oh, I'm a woman with children out of conservation industry, which is really hard to get work in. How am I going to stay out for long without it affecting my career? And that's something, even now I worry a little about. I decided that I would go back to work after that extra year kind of thing. Actually, because I was really missing my work. I'm very fortunate and I love the job I do. At that stage, I decided to get involved in formal education. So I started teaching. Conservation, environmental conservation, to apprentices. So it was perfect. It was part-time. It suited me very well. Really enjoyed, again, the education, the connection with the outdoors and getting the conservationists of the future, trained up, really. And that is kind of, it's kind of, how do you keep adapting to ensure that you are able to be there for the children, do the adventurous, amazing things you want to do in life, and also, stay in your career. It's a tough one. I'm still figuring it out. But you say about, I would consider taking things abroad, but things become more important. The family aspect and having your family around, and the children having the people they love around, things like that. It becomes quite complicated.
It does. I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy, and I don't think it will ever be easy until the kids grow up, probably.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's all a challenge. But well, it's been fantastic talking to you.
You too.
And hearing your stories. And thank you so much for having us. And such a lovely place.
It certainly is today.
We're just outside Winchester.
Beautiful.
Where you're based. So thank you for having us here.
Thank you for
coming.
And
it's been wonderful to see you again.
Thanks, Noel.
Sorry to interrupt, but this episode is sponsored by Water Offsets. If you are working on projects where you might need environmental credits, then they are the people to go to. They specialise in not only biodiversity net gain credits, but also water neutrality and nutrient neutrality too. So if you have an estate, a farm, or some other kind of landowner, or interested in that kind of project, then they could really help you find new ways of funding those projects and diversifying your land and farms, to take you through the whole process. And if you're a developer who's run into problems, then actually they can help provide those credits that you need to unlock your land and get your development done. So check out Water Offsets if you need help with any of those things. Many thanks. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you're interested in finding out more about how the environment and people are interlinked and want to find out more about engaging different groups of people with the natural world, then maybe check out our episode with Judy Lingwong, where we talk about just that. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to friends and colleagues who might be interested in the series. And a huge thank you to our sponsor, Water Offsets, and our incredibly kind supporters, Gillian Goodson Design and the Birmingham Botanical Gardens. And of course, NDLA and Monster Don for powering this episode.